Looks like we are live here, and I'm here with Paul Lubaczewski, and we're going to chat about a bunch of things, but we're going to start off with his story in Horrifying Halloween, which is called Camouflage. And maybe you want to talk to the readers a little bit about, or the viewers a little bit about what that story is, where it came from, without giving too much away.
Well, honestly, it's a Halloween from a little kid's point of view. I mean, the whole idea of Halloween when you're a kid is to be something else. I mean, when you see a little kid like go to get a costume, they don't say, I want to dress up like Superman. They don't say, I want to dress up like Captain America. I want to be, and that's like sort of the basis for it. And just, the feeling of like, the running around in autumn, trying to score candy and wanting to be something for one night, except I go a little further with it.
I think you captured that whole feeling. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been a kid trick-or-treating, but I think we all remember it no matter how old we get. And I think you really captured the whole vibe of how it goes really well.
I think everybody, like somewhere in the back of their head, if they've trick-or-treated, just remembers like a little bit of mist on the ground, a little bit of chill in the air, running from house to house. Like I think that's like one of those indelible memories. If you've trick-or-treated, I think that's like somewhere in your psyche just waiting.
Do you have a favorite memory from when you went trick-or-treating as a kid?
Oh God, back when we used to trick-or-treat, I mean, trick-or-treating was like a whole week affair. People don't even like now it's like you've got 2 hours that the town has provided for you to do your trick-or-treating. And like, back in the 70s, that was okay. We start 2 days early. We hit this part of town. Then when there's Halloween, we'll hit that, and then we'll go the night after Halloween, and everybody who's still got candy left over will dump their stuff, and we'll make out like bandits. And I actually kind of feel bad for kids. I mean, like, I don't want to glorify like the 70s as a time of growing up because a lot of us ended up on milk cartons.
I shouldn't laugh at that, I guess, but it's funny the way you put it anyway.
It's like I see posts glorifying, I grew up then and I grew up then and like we were tougher and stuff. And it's like, yeah, and a lot of us didn't quite make it. So maybe it's not all bad that we're a little more protective with our kids than what I grew up with. But I think it gets a little too much where it's like, you have 2 hours on the town's day to trick or treat. And I feel like, part of being a kid is like, it should be like a little more than that. As Halloween, I think more so than anything, except for maybe Christmas morning, is like, that's the time to be a kid, and if you don't have actually, I think Halloween may be more so because if you don't have a lot of money growing up, well, it doesn't really matter on Halloween.
Yeah. Cause the food, the candies, pretty cheap. People give it out.
Yeah, and it's provided by elsewhere. And let's face it, when you're a kid, and if you do grow up poor, like your costume may suck, but when you get home with that bag, that you're a king. And that's a wonderful feeling. It's like Christmas may be a disappointment, and you may have to try to put on a happy face. But when you come back with a bag full of candy on Halloween, there's no happy face needed. There is just whatever horror movie, well, back then, like TV's running, which was almost always Dracula. Sit down with your candy and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Well, plus I think, kids, like you said, kids sort of are big on the whole, being something else. Because, to a kid, being a kid sucks. As you get older, you realize it was actually a pretty cool thing to be, no responsibilities and all that. But when you're a kid, you really sort of think, yeah, this is the worst thing, being a kid in a lot of ways.
Oh, I can't do anything. I'm not allowed to do anything. There are all these rules. And when I grow up, what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So just the thing of being able to actually get a costume, even if it's just a rinky-dink put together costume, out of nothing, but it's more than what you can do for make-believe the rest of the year. So that kind of makes it special too for a kid, I think.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, I think even then, if you said you wanted a costume for like February or March, so you could pretend to be something, your parents might side eye you. But if you said
Yeah.
you want one for Halloween, well, the kid's got to have a costume for Halloween.
Yep.
They might not.
Did you have the dumb plastic Cooper ones?
I had a couple of those as a kid. The ones where the eye holes line up to. I would love to meet the person that the eye holes actually line up perfect. There
Yeah, they
has
were always a little low, a little high, a little off on one side.
or a little out or a little in.
Yeah.
Somewhere out there is that person that those things fit perfectly. Like the mouth actually sits correctly, the little nose holes and the eyes. And I would really like to meet that person.
There's got to be a meme of that somewhere.
Because I mean, generally that was like you would try to wear the little face mask between houses, and then you would give up on that and like have to give up at least part of your make believe for the night because, well, nobody likes to run into a telephone pole.
Plus, they could get really hot, and you'd get like sweat and like just your condensation from your breath inside of it.
I think part of what made that so bad was like the vinyl they made the little shirt thing from. So you've got like coming right up off your face and like, right into the eye holes and stuff.
Yeah, those are kids of today will never understand that.
They actually have masks.
They what?
They actually have masks. You go to like Spirit Halloween and you get like a real mask and you
build. Oh, I know. It's crazy. I remember those rubber masks when I was a kid, and they were really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And they also, if they got too hot, they would sort of start to melt, and they smelled terrible when you had it on. The smell in your face was just horrible. Yeah, I couldn't wear it for that long because it smelled so bad.
Yeah, I had a Frankenstein mask from like the early '60s that we found at a yard sale, and I never actually used it on Halloween because it was just unbearable. It was a great mask. It was really, really cool, but like actually wearing it as a mask for any period of time, a little passed out kid in the middle of the street.
Yeah, and it seems to me those things, if I remember right, those things were selling for like $40 and $50 at the time, which in that time was a lot of money.
I mean, if you start to like run up the inflation rates, it's like,
yeah,
I can't imagine that many parents were like buying those for their kids. I think that was more for like adults for like costume parties and stuff.
Yeah, and I think probably for the grown-up monster kid collectors, I think we're probably buying those up.
Well, that was one of the cool things about that time period is there was a real burst of horror collectible stuff. I mean, between models and masks and then on top of it, even if you were a smaller kid, there were like the stickers and stuff that like the Tops put out that like had all kinds of Big Daddy Roth looking monsters on them and stuff. And it was in a lot of ways the '70s was a really cool time to grow up, like being into horror, or like a great way to find out that you were into horror.
Right.
You
had the Munsters, and then you had there were so many horror comic books out there in the day, and then you had, of course, the monster serials got started then.
All of Warren, just Warren Publishing in general.
Oh God, yeah, yeah, those were great.
And then on top of it, I grew up like in Philadelphia, and we were spoiled for choices for horror movies on Saturdays. I mean, because like on Channel 17, you had Shock Theater with Dr. Shock, and then we had Creature Double Feature on 48. So you got to actually like every Saturday pick and choose which horror film you wanted to see, rather than like, oh my God, I never get to see horror films. It was like, and our parents would just go, oh, it's on Saturday afternoon. How bad could it be?
Yeah, we didn't get that here in Northern Illinois. It was like you get it like Friday and Saturday nights. I think they would have horror films. And when I was a little kid, I was not old enough to stay up for that stuff. I do remember one of the funnier stories I remember when I was I don't know, I must have been maybe 8 or 9 years old. And they were going to have Pit and the Pendulum on. And I begged my mother to let me stay up and watch it. And she's like, but you'll be too scared. I was like, no, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I spent the entire night with my bedroom light on watching for ghosts because I couldn't sleep.
The eternal lie, I'll be fine.
Yeah, it was a long time till I got to stay up and watch a horror movie again.
I think like I think the one I talked my mom into that I'll be fine was a bit of a fib was probably Salem's Lot when it ran on
Oh,
TV
jeez.
because it hit the scene with the window and I've been watching like horror movies since I was a little kid, but that scene at the window is still one of the creepiest things. I mean, the let me in scene that where the kid's just floating there is just still. Mm.
Yeah, funny. We just watched that a couple weeks ago.
The other scene in that's like full blown creep is the gravedigger after he turns in the house, like when he goes into the house and the eyes are like glowing and it's
yeah.
Well, Toby Hooper was a master.
I think that's a great movie or a good movie that could have been great if they'd shortened it up a little, but it was done for a mini series, and I think it drags a little too much myself.
There was a theatrical release that has that's a shortened version. I've never seen.
Oh, now that might be good because I think that's the problem. What is it? 3 hours and 20 minutes or something, and it's just too much. The first half of the movie drags so badly.
Yeah, there was a tightened up. I don't know if they've ever released released it on home media, but there was a tightened up version that got released into the theaters because it did so well. Well, that was a weird thing in the 70s too. Is like there were horror movies done as movies of the week, TV productions, and they were often good enough that they got theatrical releases, like The Night Stalker, Salem's Lot. There were a bunch that ended up getting a theatrical release that were just honestly they were done for TV.
Did Gargoyles ever get a theatrical release?
Which one?
Gargoyles.
Oh, Gargoyles. No, I think it's too short actually as it sits.
Is it? That's a good movie though. That's one of the really good ones that came out in the 70s, I think.
Yeah, it's not particularly long. I don't know if it was long enough to get a theatrical.
Yeah, there were a lot of good ones, but then they did House of Dark Shadows, which was sort of a condensed version of the Dark Shadows series.
I've been looking for a DVD copy of it for years because, like, for me, it's like partially the thrill of the hunt. I want to find it somewhere. I don't want to order it from Amazon.
Because I was going to say you can get it pretty cheap from Amazon. I recently got it.
Yeah, I like that's getting it from Amazon for me is like admitting I failed. I have failed as a hunter. I'll order it from Amazon. But in this case, I was in Roanoke, Virginia, in a World Market, and apparently they used to run a video store out of this World Market, and they were selling off their stock. And in there, I found like a 3-disc set of Ultramans and House of Dark Shadows on DVD, and I think I spent like $3 for both.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I walked out of there. I won. I won the world. And that's the thing. It's more fun if you find it. I mean, occasionally I'll break down. It's like, well, I just really want this badly enough. I'll go and order it, but I always feel a little bit like I failed. I mean, there are some films I love that, like, you just have to order it because you're never going to find it. Like, I ordered my wife got me the Straight to Hell Blu-ray, and there was no way I was ever going to find that, just in a store somewhere. Alex Cox directing Joe Strummer is a little too obscure for, you're just going to find it in a store.
The one that I'm amazed by is Near Dark. It's like next to impossible to find a copy at a decent price. They're all like really expensive on eBay or at least last I looked. I look every year, and
there might be a licensing issue. Anything the Weinsteins had anything to do with. A lot of the directors don't want anything to do with them now. So like, there's no
Weinstein, huh?
I'm not sure. In the case of Near Dark, I know a lot of films like that, like Kevin Smith's Dogma. You can't find it on Blu-ray and you can't stream it, and you're never going to, not anytime soon, because he doesn't want anything to do with the Weinsteins, and the Weinsteins won't sell it back to him.
Oh, wow. That's craziness. So why don't you, I know you've got a lot of works out beyond this, and so why don't you kind of give some of the viewers who don't know a little rundown of some of your other works.
Well, actually, I have something coming out. I'm going chance to announce it right here. Um, this Monday will be the cover reveal for Brat Out of Hell, which is a horror comedy. It's coming from Hellbound Books, and the book itself releases on September 30th. It's a horror comedy, and actually, I do a lot of horror comedy, but not exclusively. Like I also do a lot of horror, but since there are so few people that do horror comedy consistently, I suppose I just get known for it. It's like Jeff Strand. Everybody knows him for horror comedy, but he's done a lot of horror. And it's like I'm kind of in that same situation. It's like I've written a lot of horror short stories. I've got two collections of horror short stories. We got a novel coming from Hellbound probably next year. That's horror, but again, since it's a popular genre, but there's not a lot of guys who do it. Like if you're one of those guys, that you get known for that real quickly.
It seems to me that comedy, and especially horror comedy, it seems, for me anyway, it seems like it would be really hard to write well. Because a lot of times, if you think something's funny, you think it's funny, but maybe not everybody else does, And I'd always be afraid that nobody else is going to think it's funny.
I think you've got to commit both ways. Like you've got to if you're going to do it, you've got to you can't back off of it. And at the same time, I usually describe it as you have to really love both genres enough to meld them. Like you can't just I've seen horror writers go, well, this would be easy, and they get into it, and it's like they can't quite let themselves make fun of horror, and it's like I don't know. I grew up around horror. There's enough tropes, and there's enough stuff to make fun of, but at the same time, if you don't, the other end of it is if you don't love horror, and you try to write a comedy book that's based in horror, people will be able to tell that you're not into it. You're not into the horror aspect. You're just using it as a crutch to set up your comedy. So it's and I grew up in that perfect era where comedy, especially stand up, was starting to break into larger audiences. And like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia where horror was everywhere. It's God, actually, and if you think about it, in the '70s, it was even our cereals. I had a Fruit Brute nightlight when I was a kid, and it was everywhere. So it was first love was horror, and then on top of it, especially by the late '70s, you had all these comedians breaking. You had Steve Martin, you had George Carlin, you had Richard Pryor, and all these other guys breaking big. So it's I have a love of both comedy and horror. And coming from that background and also writing a lot of horror, it's but at the same time, it's I see where there's a Marx Brothers joke here just waiting to happen. But once you're into a horror comedy novel, or a story, you also have to completely commit to it. You can't dance around being funny, and you can't also dance around having horrific bits. You've got to just go for it full bore. And also you can't really care if not everybody gets the jokes. I mean, that's the hardest part about comedy. Not everybody is going to get jokes. Not everybody has a really great sense of humor. And God knows enough of those people read my books and want to tell me later that they don't know what was funny. But you just have to God, I mean, even stand-ups, it's their livelihood, and there's always somebody that doesn't get why it's funny. And I mean, it does to do it right. Even in film, there are some horror comedies that are brilliant and some that are, well, that was disappointing. You go back to Young Frankenstein. It's a brilliant, brilliant film. And one of the reasons why it's a brilliant, brilliant film is because you can tell Mel Brooks loves Bride of Frankenstein. You can tell that he's watched that billion times, and he knows it backwards and forwards enough to find where he can slip a joke in. Shaun of the Dead is a great film, and again, you can tell that the director has, like, he's watched a lot of horror films and really enjoys the genre, and then, you don't want to slam anybody, but there are other films like, a lot of the parody ones, they're just doing slapstick jokes, and horror is just a crutch to, like, get it through, and it's like there's no real love of it, and that stuff just it wears, and it's not even particularly funny the first time through, because it's like, to really do a good joke that lands about a horrific scene, you've got to understand why it's a horrific scene. You've got to understand, like, the nuances of that scene to even do a joke that really lands well.
Plus, I think you have to have some understanding of the history of horror and the history of where that scene fits in too. Like, for instance, Shaun of the Dead, and I didn't even catch this the first time I saw the movie, but there's the brilliant, just little passing line of "We're coming to get you, Barbara," which I did not catch the first time.
See, that's the when it works, it's usually directed by somebody that, like, if I went and looked at their video collection, I would see a lot of the same films that I dig, and it's like, and the thing is you can also use that to slide in jokes that, like, are just for a horror audience, and those are kind of fun to slide in as well, and it's like, it's funny. I think horror comedy, people find it much more unfeasible than fantasy comedy, but which is weird, because fantasy fans as a genre, they take their stuff way more seriously. I mean, that's a very, very serious, straight-laced genre, as far as they want their things a certain way, and you can't really make fun of it. And but, like, Terry Pratchett is Sir Terry Pratchett, and he made a career out of making fun of it. But again, the same thing. It's like, he knew his genre. Like, if you go back and read the early Discworld books, he's making fun of Fawford and Grey Mouser. Like, he really knew the genre, so he knew where the jokes fit.
Well, and I think perhaps one of the reasons those of us who are into horror are more open to it is just because, you tend to have fantasy movies. They don't tend to have a lot of really low budget, sort of cheesy fantasy movies, but we're very used to accepting that in horror movies. Some of the best movies are really low budget, poorly made things, and we ignore all that and go for the horror, but we also know it's there.
There are a lot of horror films that my wife's worse about this than I am, that we've only watched for one reason. Oh, we know this is going to be terrible, but it ought to be funny. It ought to be funny as we go, because it's going to, though. That tendency to watch films like that burnt us recently, because we actually watched something that was so bad, even we had to go, "Oh, this is unwatchable," and we watched it all the way through too. We watched Grizzly 2.
Oh, was that bad, huh?
Oh my God. My wife has a Grizzly t-shirt. She was looking forward to this in the worst way possible. I mean, and it just makes no sense. Like, it's nonsensical. There are just cuts that don't make any sense. It is one of the worst things I think I've ever seen in cinema. And the fact that it's like, we finally, to make it worse, that we had to wait 30 years just to find out you made a terrible film. That took 30 years. I mean, there are a lot of directors that can make a terrible film in about an hour and a half.
Yeah. My wife and I just sat through one a couple weeks ago that was sent to me to review. And I actually wound up I don't do bad reviews at Spooky Ventures, just because I do put out one review video a week, and it just seems a waste of 1 week to put out a bad one. But I wound up doing one for print that hasn't published yet. But this movie, what I don't get about it is why they released it. Because it was obviously a bunch of kids took a video camera and shot a movie, but it's not even really a movie. There's barely a story. It's mainly some cheesy special effects. They were trying to copy Evil Dead and did a lousy job of it, and a lot of like martial arts wrestling fighting, and that's like an hour and a half of that. And I mean, it's so bad that there's like, you could hear the director say, go. And then when they start the scenes, or at one point, they tell this guy, get out of the picture. And it's like, okay, so as a amateur thing, I can completely see why you would want to do it, and you'd think, hey, this is pretty cool because you shot it. I mean, they shot it in the '90s. Video cameras were hard to come by in those days, but for somebody to release it on Blu-ray, even, I don't get it.
Oh, so it had been like shot like years ago,
Yes,
and it must have developed some kind of reputation in like some kind of chat room or something. Like on
maybe, and apparently they say that the special effects earned some kind of award, but again, I don't get it. I mean, the blood looks like pink water splashing everywhere. It's just, I don't know.
And the sad thing is it's there are some low budget films, no budget films that are just incredible.
Oh
And
yeah,
that's, I mean, like actually one of my favorite films from during the pandemic was Uncle Peckerhead, which was a brilliant little film. And you could tell they had no money to shoot it in, and applause all around, because it's like knowing that how to make the story work with no money to do it with is just, it's a talent and it's an art. And I guess it's like everything, some people have that ability and some people just don't.
yeah. And I've been reviewing a lot of really low budget. And in talking about the horror comedy, I just did a review for Amityville Karen, which I'm not even sure I consider necessarily horror, although it is definitely based in horror. There's a lot of horror elements. And it is a super low budget movie, but it's very funny and it's a lot of fun. Um, and so I do a lot of these low budget ones. And then there's another one I've got a review of coming out next week called Animal Inside, which is a werewolf movie. And it was done on a super low budget, but that's not a horror comedy at all. It's a horror movie, and it's actually really good. Although I will say some of the dialogue, the characters in that movie are so well written that the dialogue just seems very real. And these guys seem like guys you would want to just sit down and have a beer with and chat with, because they seem really cool.
Well, I mean, that's like Bad Moon. Like that movie had almost no budget, and that's pretty much so a classic. And they had like no real money to work with, and so, and like it's almost, it gets harder to say, well, we don't have a budget, when you see like a lot of the stuff coming out of Europe where they never have a budget, and it's like, they've made some damn fine films over there and done it on the cheap, because like like the French film industry is not known for their blockbuster budgets.
Well, and I mean, even look at what Sam Raimi had almost no budget for Evil Dead. I mean, he had more than a lot of these micro budget guys do, but still, for the time, that was almost no budget. John Carpenter did the first Halloween on the cheap. I mean, comparatively anyway.
Oh, I think for the longest time, it might still be the most profitable film ever made.
Yeah, I think it was. Just and a large part of that is because how little it cost to make.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, compared to what it's made over the years to its original budget, it's a masterpiece of accounting, It- and that's one of the things that frustrates me with the accountancy style of filmmaking that's coming out of Hollywood right now, as it's like, yeah, you'll occasionally lose money, but when you actually hit on something, you're going to hit really big. Where like these remakes and stuff that they keep making to be a safe bet, you're only ever going to make like 10 million over budget. It's like, it's this idea of safe bet in filmmaking to do these remakes and reboots and sequels that, like, nobody's asking for, especially for films that were totally like lightning in a bottle films, that, like, it just happened to be the right director, the right cast, the right script at the right time. But it's, they're making these films because if I have a $20 million budget, I am guaranteed to get it back on a remake just on name recognition. And I'll probably make double my money on name recognition. But like the idea that it would be a good film never occurs to anybody.
No, they don't care about that. They just care about how much money it's going to make.
Yeah,
And if
but
they're going to get their money back and make some profit.
At the same time, though, I think like if they occasionally took risks, those films that take risks, they make massive profits. They don't make a safe profit. Halloween didn't make a safe profit. It made an enormous profit.
Oh yeah.
The first couple of Evil Dead films did not make safe profits compared to what what they spent on it. It made an enormous profit. I mean, going over to the comedy side, Clerks is still making money to this day, and he made that film on his credit cards.
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, you can pull that stuff off. Then again, then you have the ones that completely fail too. But I think it's just like books. When I publish books, I think I've told you this too. Is like when I publish books, I publish a book I want on my bookshelf. I don't really care whether it sells or not. I mean, don't get me wrong, I want it to sell, but I don't count on it selling because I learned very quickly that the books I thought were going to sell really well sometimes don't, and the ones that I didn't think would sell take off. So it just gave up on trying to figure it out, and I just publish books I want to publish.
Well, that's the thing. You can also never, ever, ever guess what's going to be the next thing. Like I wouldn't. At the time, zombies became the next thing. I wouldn't have guessed zombies. I thought, Romero's covered the ground. It's pretty, well treaded ground, and it's not the most incredibly scary creature like overall, and it's not really believable that like a pandemic would hit that totally. But then there was 28 Days Later, then there's Shaun of the Dead, and then there's Walking Dead, and I can shut up.
Yeah.
Apparently I guessed wrong, and it's like you can never 100% guess where it's going to go next. Like, for 4 years it seemed like the ghost idea was dead in the water. Like I can't even think of from the original Haunting in 1962 to recently, like there weren't very many good haunted anything stories. Legend of Hell House in the 1970s, Poltergeist in the 1980s, but it would be like one film and the whole idea is gone, and then it doesn't show up again. And then suddenly with like Paranormal Activity and a bunch of other films, it's like suddenly every film is a haunted film. It's all ghost stories all the time, and they all sold well. Like The Grudge was another one, and so you can never
Conjuring movies, which are sort of demonology too, but
you can never really 100% predict what's always going to sell. Like sometimes you can also speaking of demonology films. I don't think anybody called Rosemary's Baby being and then set off the entire 70s. The Satan 70s of just film after film. I mean, you had Black Rain with Ernest Borgnine and William Shatner, for the love of God.
Tom Skerritt. They just showed that one again on Svengoolie a couple weeks ago.
There was Devil Dog Hound from Hell, which I have this weird soft spot for that film. I think that's because I watched it when I was young, and it's like, I know it's not a good film, but I always...
There was a movie called Devil Dog, I think, with Alice Cooper in it that I remember seeing many years ago, and I don't think it was very good, but I think it was an Italian-made movie.
Oh, God, that thing.
Yeah.
I know which one you mean. I know which one you mean, and no, it's not very good. Alice Cooper is kind of like... when he's in a film that's good, he's good, but never watch a film just because Alice Cooper's in it.
Yeah.
I think everybody who's a big Alice Cooper fan has made that mistake at some point. Going, oh, Alice Cooper's in. Oh, why did I say yes to that? Yeah, he's really good in Suck. He's really good in was it Mouth of Madness? And then there are some other films that it's like he is not. Nothing is particularly good in this. He just happens to be here as well. And it's like that was a weird trend from the 80s too, putting rock stars in every film.
Oh yeah, he had Trick or Treat with Gene Simmons, and I think
Ozzy
was in that too. Yeah, and there were a lot of those, and some of those were terrible because from a rock music fan point of view, and I was playing in bands in those days, a lot of those played off on the whole thing of heavy metal bands are evil and devil bands, and it's like, okay, we got enough trouble with this crap already. We don't need more of this.
Gene Simmons was in a sci-fi film too with, I want to say, Tom Selleck.
Yes, I can't remember what it was called, but I remember it. I think I saw it once, and it was really bad.
I know I've seen it. I just can't remember anything about it, which that is your sign for quality, when you know you've seen a film and have no recollection of it whatsoever.
Yeah, I remember that movie, but I can't. I just remember it not being good.
But yeah, and on top of it, like, yeah, that movie with him and Ozzy in it, it's like, oh, and Ozzy, now there's somebody who's known for his ability to deliver a line.
Yeah, I love the guy, but
I've listened to Black Sabbath since I was a kid. I don't know why, had Paranoid in the house when I was a kid. But at the same time, he's not known for coherency.
no. I actually got to meet him once, and he was like super, super nice. Hard to understand, but super nice.
It's weird. You can understand him perfectly when he's singing, and then he goes to talk, and it's like,
yeah.
No, his interviews are the stuff of magic, just because I have no idea what he's saying.
My favorite bit from an Ozzy interview. This was freaking hilarious. It was a radio interview, and this was shortly after the bat incident, right? And so the interviewer is asking him to talk about the bat incident, and he tells him all of what happened and everything. And so the interviewer goes on to another question, and Ozzy goes, Excuse me, can I say something? Bats taste salty. And I lost it.
Bats taste salty. I'm going to remember that line.
I just completely lost it. And I was glad I was recording the interview, because I had to listen to that again.
Bats taste salty. Things you never thought you'd hear in this life.
Yeah, that was something.
Well, Ozzy's whole life has been something. I mean, he's had a hell of a life, but my God, I bet you he doesn't remember a lot of it, but
Oh, I'm pretty sure that.
I think from about 1973 to about like maybe 1986, I think everything's kind of a blur. Of course, he doesn't have any albums that he swears he doesn't remember recording, like Alice Cooper.
Aerosmith.
Cooper's got 3 that he swears he has no recollection.
And Aerosmith said that their which one was it? The Draw the Line. They said they were passed out in the studio, and they really have no memory of recording that album.
Cooper says he doesn't remember Dada, Zipper Catches Skin, and Special Forces.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a lengthy blank out. Yeah.
Wasn't it? I thought he'd already gone clean by then.
He went clean briefly, and then he relapsed hard. And then, if you watch the video of him for like Special Forces, you can tell that man is not healthy. As a matter of fact, he didn't do any publicity tours for the next 2 after that, because he just
Zipper Catches Skin. He looks very unhealthy on that album.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I crashed my car with that record playing in the tape deck, which I think is weirdly ironic. What a perfectly named album to wreck your car in.
Yeah, that's kind of not one of his classic eras of music anyway.
There are definitely songs in there. I mean, mind you, from that entire era, I prefer Flesh the Fashion. I think that was that was actually a pretty well put together album. Bob Ezrin knew what he was doing, and somehow kept Alice at least somewhere pointed in the right direction.
Yeah. And then that's the weird thing about Alice's catalog anyway. It's sort of up and down. I mean, he's got some great albums and then some that just aren't that consistent. Usually there's a song or two anyway that's really good on pretty much any album, but some of them are kind of forgettable.
Left to myself, honestly, I'll take the original band. You know, I don't. They rarely, if ever, misstepped.
And they
You
were
know,
much more creative.
and on top of it, I think like they were a band at first, and like when you're in a band, you bounce ideas off each other,
Right.
you feed off each other's energy, you get. I've been in a lot of bands, and the difference between trying to write alone and then writing with somebody else, where you're bouncing ideas and you've got creativity churning. It's palpable.
People feed off of each other. Yeah. I've been there, done that. There's a big difference.
And I mean, those guys were. I mean, they're a great blues band. Really, a rock blues band, and like all of them in a room, like just and then with him with his like more operatic ideas, it was just really, really a cool vibe. Like they had a lot of range of what they could do. They had like just really, really cool songs, and then that lineup goes away, and it's sort of Bob Ezrin and Chuck calling the
Yeah.
show after that. And like occasionally those are brilliant. It's like there are definitely moments on all of those albums after the original band broke up that are just flat out brilliant, but there's a lot of them that are just we need a song.
What was the big heavy metal album? Was that Constrictor?
Yeah.
I did not like that album at all, and I'm a metalhead, but it just didn't work for me.
See, I'm into punk, and so like that era of metal in general feels very contrived. And that album especially feels very contrived. And I know there are a lot of people that like love that mid '80s sound. Just to me, it seemed a very contrived sound in general. It's sort of like Hanoi Rocks watered down, and then on top of that, Hanoi Rocks is the New York Dolls watered down. So
Right.
you know, or I could just go listen to the New York Dolls.
Now,
You
see,
know,
that's completely off the subject, but I sort of have that feeling about Nirvana. Everybody goes nuts over Nirvana, and to me, if you heard a lot of the late '70s, early '80s punk, you heard everything Nirvana ever did. They weren't like inventing something; they were just doing what these guys were doing.
I really, as I've gotten older, like Nirvana at the time, it was one of those cultural like just watershed things. But like most of the bands that came after them, like that became the Seattle grunge sound, I really have no time or patience for. But like if you listen to them before they broke on Bleach, Bleach is a brute of an album. I mean, I couldn't even like I was like I don't really care for the Sub Pop label in general. Like almost everything they've put out. And again, that's opinion. I know a lot of people that love that stuff too. But like I remember I was listening to the radio station I DJ'd on, and they played Negative Creep by Nirvana, and they're like, and on the Sub Pop, I'm like, no, it isn't. Sub Pop doesn't put out music like that. The devil, you say. And it was actually on top of it, like when Smells Like Teen Spirit first started running on MTV, it was like nothing else that was running on MTV. Now, like it was just so different. I think it just hit a mood at the right time, and that's a lot of being famous in music is hitting the right
Oh,
mood at the right time. We were saying before about like films. It's like you can never guess. If I would have put money on bands that were going to be huge, I would have never put money on Nirvana.
no,
And especially like after hearing them initially, I would have never guessed in a million years that they would become the biggest band on the planet. Which again, shows how much I know. They were a band that came through and played J.C. Dobbs in Philly. It's like they're this like little Seattle band, and so yeah, they've got some pretty cool songs. Okay, they're all right. And suddenly they're the largest group in the history of history.
yeah.
Okay, how
If you
about that
listen to
happen?
some people, they're the greatest band ever. You know, and I just don't get it. But
Singles are better. Bleach is better. I can't remember the last time I've listened to Nevermind, and In Utero was kind of like it was definitely a better album than then never mind, at least in my opinion. And a lot of that, I think, was because they were purposely trying to piss off the record company. And that kind of just wanting to be an irritant is always amusing to me. They did everything, like they didn't like how big they got, and they did everything in their power within utero to just annoy the shit out of the record company. Like the first time they recorded it, the record company completely refused to release it. So they re-recorded it again, and it's like they changed exactly enough to get it released, and then they gave it a cover that Walmart wouldn't carry, and they did that on purpose. And there was a lot of, okay, you've told us everything that we're supposed to do, and we're going to do as little of that as humanly possible. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about Nirvana is, like, even if they're an overrated band, they gave a lot of bands that they did take their influences from, like, they gave them some new life. Like just by wearing their T-shirts, just by covering their songs. Like they had a bunch of singles where they covered stuff they liked. Kurt Cobain wearing a Flipper T-shirt suddenly got Flipper a brand new record contract. So it's like this little obscure punk band from San Francisco suddenly on Deaf America because Kurt Cobain wore a Flipper T-shirt.
That's funny.
It's weird to have that kind of power, though.
That's crazy.
I put on a T-shirt, suddenly they got a record deal.
So let's go back. Where can people find your books and your stuff? Where should they look? You got a website?
Yeah, I do actually. It's easier to find me on Facebook and then go from there. I mean, I use the website for news, and occasionally I put up stuff that I write on there. Like I should do it more often. Bad author. But the Facebook is usually the best place to find me. It's like I use Twitter and I use Instagram, but I use them exactly enough. I have a Facebook page though, and as far as finding the books, honestly, goodly chunk of them are wherever you find books. I mean, I know I just got to re-release my first novel, I Never Eat Cheesesteak, and I got to re-release that with an all new edit, which is like every author's dream, to go back to their first novel and fix everything they didn't know. And that's like available in Barnes and Noble. That's pretty much so everywhere. IndieBound carries it, so if IndieBound carries it, your weird, quirky little local bookstore can order it for you.
Cool.
But yeah, I would avoid Abe because rarely do used copies show up, and the new copies, most of the people that are carrying it on Abe. And actually, if you're looking for new copies in general, Abe is usually a little overpriced. I mean, I use Abe all the time, but I use it for used books.
Yeah, you know what's funny? I don't know if you've done this. You probably have. If you look for your books on eBay, they always show up, and they're usually sometimes priced really, really high, crazily high. And it's like, I guess somebody just they're going to buy it and then ship it, drop ship it or something. I don't know, but
algorithms will get a hold of your book and then like push it to like, I've had them go. I think I had one go as high as 700, and the book was still out. That was the part that was really hilarious to me. The book was still out, still in print. You could go to Amazon and get it for like $15. And somebody, because the algorithm caught a hold of it and nobody checked to see if this was like not being ridiculous, the algorithm had it like up to like $700. And I'm like, but you can buy this new right now, and it's like, and you can never guess on that either. Cause I mean, like my first novel, the original printing on 50/50 press, that's out of print. You would think that would be like ridiculous now, and it's like it's 40, but if you consider that it's out of print right now, that's actually pretty moderate.
Yeah, the German edition of My Strange Sound of Cthulhu has been out of print for a few years now, and I've seen that going for about $1,000. I don't know if anybody buys it, but I've seen it listed for that price.
Well, that's oh god, I'm a huge Lumley fan, and there's a couple of his books I am never going to own because they were just little novellas in the Necroscope series, and the prices on them are always just completely through the roof. I mean, but then again, that's like part of the thrill of the hunt. There, I mean, it took me years to find a copy of They Thirst by McCammon. Same thing, since he is very tight on those first few books about letting them be in print. They're kind of difficult to get a hold of, and some days the algorithm says those things go for, and these were mass market produced, but like they'll go for like well over $100. And then I just lucked into one for 10, and I like couldn't get the money out of my pocket fast enough.
Yeah, I wound up. It's funny because I collect, obviously, doing the Lovecraft book and everything. I collect a lot of Lovecraft books and a lot of Lovecraft stuff. And I was at Record Store Day one year, and my wife and stepdaughter were off looking at stuff, and I'm over, just sort of done. I had the stuff I wanted to get, and I'm just sort of standing there. And standing in front of this display, and I turn around, and right in my face was the oldest Lovecraft book I'd ever, older than any of them I'd ever owned, like paperback from like 1942 or something. And I'm like, oh, well, I just turned around and it's in my face. I got to buy this. So I did.
I have a first print of Weird Shadow over Innsmouth. And the thing is I found it in the, like, just somebody had a box of books for like 50 cents each. And I found it in there, and it's just like, well, that's mine now.
That might be the one I got. I think it is, actually.
Yeah, I found it in a 50-cent box of just, these are my old paperbacks, and I want to get rid of them. And I just try to keep my mouth shut as I'm giving the person their 50 cents, and let me get out of here.
I paid a bit more than 50 cents for my copy. That's for sure. That reminds me, when I was a kid, I was probably 12 years old, and there was, I used to have, no, I was older than that, maybe 13, but anyway, I would have my stepdad take me around to garage sales sometimes, and there was going to be a huge garage sale on a Saturday, and they had listed having lots of comic books. So I got him to take me there, and we got talking to the people. Turns out their son had been a huge comic book collector, and he passed away, and so they just sold them all. But they had no idea what any of them were worth. So they were selling them all for $0.25 each. And they said that first thing that morning, the first guy in the door got a copy of Amazing Spider-Man #1 for 25 cents. And I mean, even back then, I think it was selling for $400.
Yeah. And that guy told that story for the rest of his life.
Oh, you bet he did.
The rest of his life. Hey, let me tell you about the time I found.
I mean, by the time I got there, because my dad didn't want to get out until it was probably noon, 1 o'clock. And so they were pretty well, they still had tons of comics, but all the good stuff was gone. But yeah.
I don't, like, it's funny. I rarely buy comics anymore. And I used to, like, all the time. It's like, oh, like if it's a book that was written for adults, like maybe like Ralph's Art Adventures, and I see one of those in a store, I snap it up. Or like horror comics. No, that's like, that seems to be what I generally go for. Like especially like older ones. Like if I can find, like recently I found on eBay, I found the first run of Lumley's Necroscope, the comics, and I found it for like a ridiculously cheap price. And it was just like, it was like the first 5 issues, and it's just like, yeah, I need that.
Nice.
And I bought from like one story that like influenced the heck out of me when I read it when it was new. From like something called Tales from Dracula's Coffin or something. It was a Warren like quick knockoff, where they took some stories from some of their other stuff and just quick slapped it together. But it was a story called Life of Riley. And even that had been like the author had redone it for the 70s. And it originally goes back to a 1950s one about this, like, this bank robber who's supposed to hook up with these people who are going to get him out of town. And they're in the swamp. and they keep fattening them up and fattening them up. And then he opens up their chest freezer, and he finds that like what they've been fattening them up on are all the other guys that they've supposedly gotten out of town, and that he's next.
Very familiar.
Yeah, and it's like that one influenced the heck out of me. Like cannibals have come up a couple of times in my shorts, just because I read that when I was a kid. And so I went and hunted down a copy of that, and I like framed it, and it's in my stairwell now. Just because like I recognize that, like, if I hadn't read that story then, I can think of at least 3 of the stories I ended up writing as an author probably don't happen because I don't have that really strong desire to really, like, it doesn't fascinate me so much. And I think that's like actually one of the cool things about, like, bringing it all back to like Halloween and stuff, like, watching horror movies as a kid, like when you're an adult as an author, there are all kinds of little influences you never even think of, but it's like something you watched as a kid, or like, just a memory you don't even consider anymore as like being all that important. But like, man, they're just sitting there just waiting for you to start typing, and like, boom, there it comes out. And it's like, I love recognizing one of those and going, oh, I know where I thought of that.
I sometimes put some in intentionally, some little pieces in intentionally, if I know that something's influenced by something. I'll like I'm doing my Wizard Song novella. Or it's a short novel, I guess, but it's I'm doing the sequel to that now, and there's an invasion of Earth happening, and so I'm doing a lot of nods to War of the Worlds just because that's the original invasion of Earth. Just putting lot of little Easter eggs in there for it to see if everybody catches them, or if anybody catches them.
One of these days, I'm going to put in something from Island of Terror, an old Peter Cushing film, and there's this scene in there I remember as a kid watching it on Creature Double Feature that it freaked me out, something evil, like where they chop off Cushing's arm, because like the whole idea is there are these creatures loose on this island that eat bones by just sucking them out of you.
Oh yeah, they're those big eyeball things, right?
Yeah. And at one point, the thing grabs Cushing's arm, and he's like, chop it off. And they chop it off, and the stump's there, and it squirts blood. And I'm sure now if I watched that today, I'd go, it's kind of cheesy. But when you're 8 years old in like 1978, and you're not even supposed to be watching something like this, but you are because your parents think, well, they're running it in the afternoon, it must be fine. That lingers, man. that one, I think one of these days I'm probably going to put a nod somewhere, just because it's like, yeah, I can still remember sitting there in my friend Sean's den, and both of us going, oh, because like we had never seen an effect like that, And it's like, yeah, sure, like as you get older, like and you start watching stuff like Texas Chainsaw, it's like all that stuff starts to get old hat. But the first time you watch an effect like that, it's like a lot of that Hammer stuff, like like I said, they ran it on Creature Double Feature, which is like in the afternoon, and our parents are just like, yeah, whatever. And it's like a lot of that stuff was really brutal. I think the last time I could say I was officially scared watching a film is Dracula Prince of Darkness. There's this scene in the beginning where she's like, they kill the husband and drain his blood to like bring Dracula back. And she, like the butler takes the wife down and then locks the door. And she's like trapped in the crypt with the resurrected Dracula. And it's like the way they built that scene, it scared the ever living bejesus out of me as a kid. And it's like gory. They show the blood draining out of the guy. They show his throat getting slit, and it's like probably wasn't the best thing for me to be watching today.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Hammer kind of pushed the envelope in those days.
Oh God, yeah. And if you read the books, like the critic books from the time period, you could tell the critics that like had grown up on like the Universal stuff, oh, they resented Hammer. You could feel the just palpable resentment of Hammer in their descriptions, because like I used to, like, when I was a kid, like, every library had these tabletop books about like horror films, and there were a bunch of them back then, and like every school library had them, and I checked all of them out and kept them as long as I could get away with. But like, you'd read like the descriptions of, like, the descriptions of the older films would be just descriptions of the films, and maybe like the critiques would be like whatever was the popular critique of them at the time. And then it got to Hammer, and you could just feel that film reviewer just resent all the blood and gore in those Hammer films, and just the palpable, I guess some people liked them, the description. And of course, that made me want to watch them all the more.
Oh, of course.
Because it's like, I mean, mind you, I've discovered, I wish books like that still kept coming out, because I discovered so many cool films, where like, and that was like, part of the joy was like, especially in the VHS era, going back and seeing these classic films that weren't being run, like finding like a copy of Vampire somewhere and getting to see that, or, like The Haunting with Ray Milland, all these films. And it's just because I had these tabletop books to look at, and like, the way it was talked up, it's like, wow, I've got to see this at some point. And then to finally actually get to see them, it's like that kind of cool. I wish there was more of that. I wish there was more archiving of what's come since then, because it's like, I think a lot of films are dropping. They have their run, and then they have their streaming run, and then they're kind of dropping off the radar, and that's kind of a shame.
Which is another reason I'm not a big fan of streaming. I'm all about owning the physical copy, because if it's not available on streaming, I don't care. I have it.
Well, that's the thing. And you only really own, like, you can buy something on streaming, but you really only own it as long as the service provider decrees that you have it.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, so it's like, yeah, you can watch it as long as you want until we decide that we're not carrying it anymore, in which case you can go pound sand. Me, on the other hand, I have Videodrome forever. I have it on a nice Blu-ray, and I can watch that whenever I damn well please. And if I don't have to worry about streaming services, all I have to have is a Blu-ray player. No, I'm big on, I want hard copy. It's like I love what streaming opens up, but again, you only have it for so long.
Well, in streaming, if you subscribe to a streaming service, like we've got Amazon Prime, and if something is on there and I have it on the disc, it's easier to just bring it up on Amazon and watch it, than it is to get out my disc. Although the disc looks better, the video quality looks better.
I guess it depends on the release. I mean, some, like, HBO has had some really, really crisp copies in their streaming service lately. Like, I went and rewatched Godzilla versus the Smog Monster on there, and they have a really nice, just beautifully crisp copy of it. And it's like, so it was kind of cool to see this film that I've only ever seen in either VHS or through broadcast television, and I mean broadcast television with rabbit ears and stuff, to see this like beautifully crisp thing. It's like, another thing I always do is, like, when a film I love, it gets re-released into the theaters for whatever reason, I go running for it, because I want to see it the way the director, the way he envisioned it when he made it. Like, I've gotten to see Dracula in the theater, like the original 31. On October 1st, I'm going to go see a double feature of The Mummy and Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's like, but that's like the coolest way to see that film, is like, because and we're so used to seeing them on TV, we don't realize that, like, the director had a vision of how it was going to play on a big screen. He never even considered this.
No, there wasn't even that option in those days.
Yeah, they never even considered this tiny little, and even filmmakers, like, for a long time, had never considered how it was going to look on a TV. And so like when you see it on a big screen, it's a totally different experience. Like, even films I've seen, like I saw when they came out, like I saw Godzilla 2000 at a drive-in, which by the way is the best way to ever watch a Godzilla film on earth. And then I own it on disc, and it's like the experience is completely different. It's like a multi-story tall Godzilla versus television Godzilla. It's not nearly as cool.
No. I guess I think Halloween's coming out to the theaters again.
Well, yeah, because Halloween Ends is coming out.
Right, and they're going to run the original.
Yeah, so they're tying it, which makes sense.
Yeah,
But I think I got to see, like, we have this like really like renovated classic theater, and I want to see what they're running because like last year they ran Dracula, and that was awesome. Like even my son, who generally views my old black and white films as okay, I guess I'll humor him. Even he enjoyed it. So I mean, that's and it's funny. He grew up around them, but like he's younger, internet era, and it's like his favorite horror film growing up was Sinister. So definitely a different vibe from like what I had growing up, where it was like again coming back to Halloween. Every Halloween, PBS ran Dracula. And to this day, I watch some version of it on Halloween night. We hand out candy, and then it's time to settle in. Somebody's playing Dracula tonight.
that is an absolute classic.
I mean, the thing is the actual. It's amazing to think how many good versions of that story there are. I mean, and you can like see different things in different pieces. I mean, there's like if you want the closest to the actual book, there's the 77 BBC version. Some people like the Langella version has got like a lot of pomp and circumstance. Jack Palance gave the character all kinds of nuanced emotions that he'd never had before. If you want class, of course, there's Lugosi. If you want pure menace, Christopher Lee. And it's amazing to think that like over the time since that book has come out, there's so many wonderful takes on that character, which is also amazing because at first the widow didn't want there to be any film versions.
Yeah, I remember she went after Nosferatu, and I think they pulled all the copies of it. They were supposed to have been destroyed, but obviously not all of them were.
A couple of people recognized what a sin it would be to destroy every copy and held on to them, and that was on the lost films list for a long time, and then finally somebody fessed up and went, "Yeah, we didn't quite destroy every copy." And that's one of the cool things that's happened, especially after like over the years. And one of the cool things about like the internet opening up the world a bit more is films that were thought lost, man, have been reappearing, and I think that's great. And maybe one day, one of those films will be London After Midnight.
I was going to mention that. That's a long lost book, or long lost movie, I mean.
Yeah, unfortunately, it got caught in the Universal fire.
Uh-huh.
There was a fire at where Universal kept all of their prints in the 60s, and that got London After Midnight. And I mean, it got a bunch of other films too. But God, all the stills from that, looking at that, the stills from that film for like my entire life, and have never seen it. And just, me and a lot of other people would finally love to see it. I mean, mind you, if you want to see at least the storyline, there's a Lugosi version. Mark of the Vampire is more or less the exact same story as London After Midnight.
But it doesn't look the same. Not from those pictures.
Well, I mean, if you take out the Lugosi Chaney like Chaney's makeup,
Yeah.
the rest of the film looks pretty close. But yeah, that Chaney's makeup on that work was insane.
Yeah, Chaney was the master of makeup.
and the willingness to put himself through incredible amounts of pain just to make it look right.
Right.
Because I mean, if you like, there are like a lot of photos of him like doing that makeup and like the wires and stuff that he had to put. Oh, it just looks incredibly painful.
What? There's a movie, early science fiction movie, with robots that are becoming human. I can't remember the name of it. It's probably from the 50s or early 60s. But the robots the actors playing the robots had to wear these contact lenses that would just destroy their eyes. And they couldn't film for more than 10 minutes or they'd cause permanent damage to their eyes. So
Well,
all their scenes are like shot really fast.
well, it's like Christopher Lee. He had these red contacts for a lot of the scenes in Dracula when Dracula was supposed to look like really mad or really vicious. And, again, he couldn't wear them very long. So the scenes are short because they hurt like buggery, according to Lee. And I figure if Christopher Lee, a man with his life, says
Yeah,
something hurts, it hurts a lot. I
yeah.
mean,
He was a trip as a person. He'd been through a lot.
this is a guy that was a spy during World War II, and he's saying it hurts a lot.
Yeah, he was literally the inspiration for James Bond because Ian Fleming was his cousin or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's like he's the only person to star in Tolkien who met Tolkien. You know,
yeah,
his entire life was amazing.
yeah,
And but again, considering his life and considering how much he did in his life, if Christopher Lee says that hurts a lot, I'm going to go with I wouldn't be able to take it.
yeah. I remember one thing from Christopher Lee. I remember he said that there was one movie he shot, and somebody got stabbed, and he told the
Just Peter
director,
Jackson.
"That's not what it sounds like when somebody gets stabbed. I can tell you what it sounds like."
It was Lord of the Rings when he
That's
was
right.
shooting that, and he was shooting with Peter Jackson, and they're like trying to set up this like stabbing scene, and Lee's like, nope, that's not what it sounds like. It sounds like this, and Jackson's just sitting there going, okay. I actually love the story of Tim Burton when he cast Lee in Sleepy Hollow. He totally fanboyed, and I would have too. But he's sitting there and he's like, Lee has to do the audition because it's Hollywood and he has to, and and then there's like the meet and greet with the director to make sure everything's going to work out, and this is all scheduled, so they're having to do this. Meanwhile, Burton admitted he's like, I'm just sitting here the entire time going, holy shit, I'm talking to Dracula. I'm hanging out with Dracula. Holy shit. Which is exactly how I would have been too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Um, but yeah, what you got plans? You're gonna for Halloween? You're gonna do the trick or treaters and then watch
Oh yeah.
Dracula?
Yeah, we our town gets hit every year pretty hard. And I mean that's great. And then we like afterwards we'll watch Dracula like every year. I have yet to decide on a version, but who knows? Probably going to be Lee. I tend to lean toward a Lee version every year just because I have a lot of them on disc. But who knows who has what streaming too. You know,
Yeah,
Is God actually if somebody has the Palance version streaming, I have it on VHS, which does me little good these days. But if somebody was streaming the Palance version, I'd actually probably watch that because the Palance version gets no credit. So many of the ideas that Bram Stoker's by Coppola gets credit for were actually just cribbed from Dan Curtis's Dracula. Like the idea of like the love across time, which I mean Curtis kind of ripped himself off there because that's also Dark Shadows.
right.
But the idea of Dracula as this like warrior prince and all of that and like really delving into that's all in Dan Curtis's Dracula with Jack Palance.
Well, and Dan Curtis was the man in the day. I mean,
That
come on.
combination of Dan Curtis and Matheson was just, for a period there, they were just unstoppable. I mean, Trilogy of Terror, Night Stalker, Dark Shadows, Dan Curtis's Dracula,
Norless tapes,
Norless Tapes, which
yeah.
I have that.
Which is sort of Night Stalker, sort of.
But I mean that combination. I mean, Richard Matheson was a wonderful author on his own right, but for some and like Dan Curtis had an understanding of how to make horror work on TV like nobody else.
Yep.
I don't think anybody has ever existed that had an understanding of filming horror for television and making it work in a way that would creep the hell out of an audience like Dan Curtis did. I mean, and he just could do it again and again and again. And it's funny, he made a lot more money after he stopped doing horror, but and I think that's actually kind of funny because he made a lot more money, but he'll always be remembered for Night Stalker, Night Strangler,
Trilogy of Terror. That's
Trilogy of Terror,
absolute classic.
Dark Shadows. That will always be Dan Curtis. And then he did these like big epic things in the late '70s and '80s, and I don't think most people remember he even worked on that stuff.
Nope, I don't think so. Not at all. Um,
But that's one of the great things about the horror genre. It's one of the most supportive genres out there. And like if you do something for the horror genre, those people will support you forever. I mean, like you go to cons and like people that were like in one horror film 30 years ago are still flocked to their table. Their table is still flocked to this day. And I think that's like one of the really cool things. It's a really, really loyal genre. If you made people happy doing it, they will support you from now until forever.
yeah, and I've heard some horror stories. Pardon the pun, but I've heard some horror stories about some bad apples in the horror writing community. But literally everybody I've seen, I've connected with, has just been so nice, and everybody supports everybody else, and it's a great genre.
I,
Um,
my wife actually,
I look at it as a tribe. We're all sort of part of a tribe.
my wife was like so surprised that like when she came with me to a con, like all the authors trade. We don't necessarily buy each other's books as much as, dude, want to trade? And she like saw that barter system where like we each of us valued the other person equally, as like there was no, well, you should buy my book because I'm better than you. There was, hey, want to trade? And I think that is like it's just indicative of a very inclusive little tribe of people, that just love this genre so, and it's also incredibly loyal. I mean, if when you have to do a lot to really burn your fans in the genre, I like I said, people who have been in like one film 40 years ago can continue to like run the con circuit and have their booth filled to the brim year in and year out, and it's like, and I don't think other genres really have that kind of loyalty and have that kind of fan base.
No, I think you're right. Star Trek maybe, and Doctor Who maybe, but those are specific shows.
Yeah, I think that's like, science fiction in general, maybe not like, but like, because like, I mean, we'll support bad stuff, we'll support, well, that was my crappiest, my least favorite version of like, Nightmare Before Elm Street. Such and such actor who starred as third victim is going to be at this con. Well, god damn it, I have to meet them. You know what I mean?
Autograph.
Yeah, I mean, hell, I have. I'm friends with Pat Miller, who was the gas station attendant in Maximum Overdrive,
Oh
and
wow.
he like I was at CreepyCon with him, and like next to him, and he had people, oh my god, you're the guy, like all day. And it's like, that's an obscure film, and that's an obscure role in an obscure film, and he had people like, all day. And I don't think you get that kind of loyalty. where it's like there aren't a lot of sci-fi fans who will like squee about seeing somebody from like Buck Rogers.
Yeah, I don't think so, unless it's the big cast members.
It's like, we're for us, it's like somebody could go on to other things, but they'll always be that person from the horror film for us.
Yeah,
Like nobody who goes to like sci-fi conventions, when they first hear the name Richard Mall, thinks he was in Buck Rogers. They think Bull from Night Court, just like everybody else. But yeah,
right.
he was a villain in Buck Rogers.
Yeah, well, I do remember. This is kind of funny. My wife and I went to a Star Trek convention in 2015, I think, and Denise Crosby was there. Had a table and was there, and so she's there for Star Trek. My wife's talking to her about Pet Cemetery because she loved that movie.
See, that's kind of what I mean. It's like once you gave us like a moment in horror, like you're ours forever, and we'll support whatever, And like I've seen people who watch films just because they love somebody from horror films, and they'll watch non-horror films just to see that person, and they'll line up at the tables, and it's a very, very loyal and very like cool community that way. And it's like, you see some of the fans like book wise, and it's like, man, like some of the fans for horror writing even are just, they put so much of themselves into it. It's like it feels like, man, like I may be writing this stuff, but you work harder at it than I do.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the hell out of every one of those people, because it's like, without that kind of fan base, I think a lot of us are out of a job real quick.
Yeah, and it's like you said, I love the whole horror and spooky community. It's like there's just something really special about it.
It's very friendly, it's very loyal, and it's like everybody kind of looks out for each other in a way you don't see in a lot of other communities. Like I've written in other genres, and I don't get the feeling of that sense of community when I go to publicize those books. Like I've written fantasy, and like, that, like, I love fantasy too, but it's like, I noticed that the fantasy community want big books by big writers, where, the horror community will support anybody who does it. And matter of fact, they would love to see your little book get huge, because like that's almost like a vindication that everybody now knows that, oh, this really cool thing that I like. See now everybody, it is really cool. And that's like, it's a different vibe entirely. Like one side seems to want to root for the winners, and the other side wants to root for everybody.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. So I think that's pretty much everything I had in mind. But is there anything else you'd want to talk about?
Nope. Like I said, Monday on Facebook and on my website and on Twitter and Instagram and everything else I'm expected to do as an author. There will be a cover reveal for Brat Out of Hell, and it releases on September 30th from Hellbound Books.
I love the title.
The whole idea is a demon prince who runs away from hell.
Oh, nice. So, and if you want to pick up Paul's story and a lot of other stuff in Horrifying Halloween, you can get that at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound. And this video I will also put up on Spooky Ventures a week from tomorrow. I'll put a little bumper at the beginning and end, and then it'll go up on Spooky Ventures as a spooky feature. So it'll be up there next week. So that's it. All right. Thanks you very much, Paul. Really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks. Thank you for having me on. And wow, hour and a half almost.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it.
Though both of my cats came up on the bed in the meantime, because I'm doing this upstairs because it was a quiet place, and 2 out of 3 cats are now on the bed. At one point, this job like that, because the the female Elsa, the Bride of Kittenstein. She bites when she doesn't get sufficient attention, and she bit me right on the knee.
Oh, geez.
It
Ouch.
ain't hard, but
I saw it jiggle a little a couple times.
yeah, Elsa showed up. Yeah, she's named for Elsa Lanchester. She showed up on Elsa Lanchester's birthday. Somebody dumped her in town, and she followed my son home.
Nice. I like people who rescue animals.
That's why we seem to have the number is 3 cats, and every time we're like, well, we're going to get it down to 2. Then some poor furry wave shows up out of the night needing somewhere, and then it's back to 3 again.
Nice.
But
All right.
yeah,
Well, let's. I'll see you around on Facebook, and thanks anybody who tuned in. And this will be out on Facebook forever too, so anybody can check it out. All right. Well, thanks, Paul.
thank you very much.
Have a good rest of your evening.
You too.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.